Okay, here we go. So I did give you this sheet. Kings, northern kings on top, southern kings on the bottom. And one of the reasons I like this is because it lists the character of the king. And, if you're a student, you like the top one more than the bottom one because the top's all the same answer. But we don't like the answer, but it makes the test easier. Bad, 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 bad. There is one, sorry, hit my microphone. There's one guy, he does a little good thing, but then he just goes back with everybody else. We'll talk about that when we get there. But when you look at the bottom, you see some hope. There's some good that pops up. The other thing I would point out is relation to the predecessor. In the bottom, they're all family, right? Son, 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 mother, grandson. Did you know there was a queen of Israel? Yeah. So we'll get to that eventually. But at the top, there's a lot more. What's the right word? Commotion. Let's just call it that. There's a lot more commotion going on, and we're going to get to part of that tonight. So you may find that helpful. I started to do this one. It's a better chart, but yeah, it prints out pretty tiny. It's better on the computer because you can enlarge your font and not have to see the whole page at one time. But I'm looking for something that would also include the prophets, but I haven't found something I really like. 1 Kings 13 is where we're at tonight. We kind of started a story that I think is pretty fascinating because it really doesn't have anything to do with anything, but it's a fascinating story. It does have to do with one of the kings, Jeroboam. It's told that, things are going to go bad for him. And a prophet in the first part of 13 delivers that message. And the prophet was told, don't eat or drink and don't go back the same way. And he seems to be following along with that until we get to verse 11. Now there was an old prophet living in Bethel. Okay, Bethel's a famous place. House of God, that's where Jacob had his dream of the ladder. Remember that? That was in Bethel, the house of God. So that became a very important location for the Israelites over time. This guy's not a new prophet, he's an old prophet. And, I'm beginning to think the old prophets are really cool. I didn't so much, 30 years ago, but now I think the old prophets are pretty cool. He's home with his sons, and he hears about this prophet and the message he's delivered, and he inquires. You can read there. He tries to find which way he went. He saddles a donkey. He goes after this guy. He says in verse 15, "Come home with me and eat something." And what is the young prophet that's delivered this important message to Jeroboam, what does he say? He says, "No way." Because the Lord's message to me was, eat no food, drink no water there, and do not return by the way you came. And so we're going, way to go. Way to know your mission and stick to it. And then there's verse 18. Then the old prophet said, "I too am a prophet like you. And an angel has told me in a message from the Lord, bring him back with you to your house so that he can eat food and drink water." And in case we don't realize what's going on, the text says, but he had lied to him. Do you know who Jerry Clower is? Jerry Clower is a comedian, tells old down-home stories from a lot of them from Louisiana and Arkansas. And he has one that I really like about one of the family members that he was a liar. And he lied a lot of times, and so people kind of ignored him. And he came running in the house one time screaming, "There's a lion in the yard. There's a lion in the yard." And the dad goes out. And there was a collie dog that somebody had sheared off the hair to make it look like a lion. And so the dad gets mad, slaps him down and says, "Don't lie." And he said, "I'm not lying, I'm not lying." He said, "Go in the side room and pray for the sin of forgiveness of lying. You've heard this when you're coming with me. There is a point, I'm not just telling you a good joke." And he comes back out and he said, "Have you repented?" He said, "Well, when I was out in the side room, the Lord spoke directly to me." And he said the first time he saw that dog, he thought it was a lion too. Okay, I condensed it a little bit, but you're getting my point. It's easy for people to claim they're speaking for God, right? So I want to try to humanize this young prophet a little bit. Why does he change his mind? Because we just get a few words and he's like, "I know my mission." All of a sudden, he's going with this old prophet, not seeming to be on task. Well, why was that? I think there was more happening than he just said one sentence and he changed his mind. Right. He may have recognized him. He may go, I've looked up to you a long time. He's an old prophet, and they come from a culture that had respect for their elders. So I think that's probably a factor. And in fact, this old prophet says, "I'm a man of God. I'm a prophet too, as you are." And then he claimed that an angel spoke to him. Okay? So maybe something's changed. He claimed to speak for the Lord. The Lord said, right? And he says, "Come back to my house and eat with me." Here's this prophet who is still serving Yahweh. He hasn't joined the idolaters, apparently, right? He's with me. He's on our side. Even though he's living in North Israel, he's not following the ways of Jeroboam. And he's not really like offering something grand and spectacular. How about a little food, a little water? It's a long trip home. Right. He's not asking him to do something way out of the box. Yes, just that. So I don't pretend to understand all that was happening, but I do want to try to take something away from this, right? Why is it in there? What is there for us? It can be difficult to know what the right thing to do is sometimes, because we get a lot of voices, even voices that seem right. And maybe the most insidious are some of our cultural values that just everybody goes, "Well, that's right. That's how you do things. That's what's expected." That may or may not always be the appropriate thing to do, particularly in a case where God has told you to do something else. So you probably know the rest of the story. While they were sitting at the table, the Lord's message came to the old prophet, who brought him back. So he cried out to the prophet who had come from Judah, "This is what the Lord has said. You have rebelled against the Lord's instruction and have not obeyed the command the Lord your God gave you. You went back and you ate food. And you drink water in the place of which he had said to you, eat no food, drink no water. Therefore your corpse will not be buried in your ancestral tomb. So he did what he was supposed to do. And I don't want this to be like we're always afraid of making a mistake because a mistake dooms us, right? Sometimes mistakes are how we learn best. Sometimes the goal is not to not do anything wrong. It's to do good and do right. Sometimes those aren't necessarily exclusive. This is a hard story for me because this old prophet seems to hear from God after he's lied about it. So I want to know more. What's the motivation to lie to this guy? But as we read on, we see what happens. He leaves. He gets killed by a lion. The lion stands next to the body and next to the donkey, which is, if you're walking by, you don't expect to. It surprises the people that walk by. Because if a lion's on the kill, he's usually eating, right? He's not just sitting there. And why didn't he kill the donkey too? There's a point to this. And it seems to me to be in contrast to what's happening in North Israel. Again, just to remind us, they weren't rejecting Yahweh, but they were rejecting Yahweh only, right? They were very accommodating, adapting, politically expedient, all of those things. Didn't want the two halves to get back together because they might work it out. So there's a lot going on here, and maybe the point is about accommodation. You need to listen, and you need to follow. But even in the midst of all that, even with Jeroboam's warning, we get to verse 33, Jeroboam still did not change his evil ways. So even this, one sentence and I'm coming to you, even this pronouncement to Jeroboam about what's going to happen, if Jeroboam had repented, was there room for him to turn that ship? Well, maybe. Because that's what that seems to indicate to me. Sue? Yes. Yeah. Yes. I don't think it's that one. Somebody is thrown in with Elisha's bones, and when they touch, is that the one you're talking about? I think it's Elisha's bones that brings somebody back to life. So I don't think. Right. Yeah. Well, we have something to pay attention to when we get to it, because the only thing that's ringing in my head is about Elisha when they throw the body in the tomb. Okay, so let's watch out for that. Right? Right. And I think that reinforces the point. We miss some things because culturally we think about things differently. And this might have been obvious to somebody that grew up at that time what was actually being said. And then you start getting into when were these things written, how much later than when they happened, the author's intent, what is he trying to show? And I think part of it is he's trying to build this case that people were lax about listening, the word of the Lord, listening to God. And here's just another example. You can be a king, you can be a prophet, that both can happen to you. But again, I don't think the intent's to say God's just waiting to zap you, right? But there are consequences when we choose not to. Yep, I think I'm dead on batteries, maybe. Battery time. That's a story I'm remembering, but there may be another. So I think one of the things here is that Jeroboam is a religious person. He's just has an openness and leads the people in this openness. So he tells his wife to disguise himself, go to Shiloh, which is another famous location that the prophets lived. And he visits the prophet there. He's old, he's lost his eyesight. He tells his wife to disguise herself. You know, he's not going to recognize you. But the Lord has already spoken to the prophet before the wife gets there. And so he, as she's approaching, I like this in verse 6 of chapter 14. Come on in, wife of Jeroboam. So kind of the whatever effort she put in the ruse, it didn't work out so good. It spoiled it from the beginning. The blind guy can even see she's the wife of Jeroboam. Why are you pretending to be someone else? I have been commissioned to give you bad news. So, is this a case where Jeroboam, he's trying to play all sides, that he's gotten some bad news about his future. Now his son is sick. It seems to be starting. He reaches out to the prophet of God, maybe to hear some different news. But he just jumps right in and says, nope, bad news. Go tell Jeroboam, this is what the Lord God of Israel has said. I raised you up from among the people, and made you ruler over my people Israel. And he tore it away. But you are not, here's the indictment, you are not like my servant David, who kept my commandments and followed me wholeheartedly by doing only what I approve. Does that mean every act of David's life? No, because there was that Bathsheba thing. There was killing her husband. So this is not to say David was sinless, but this is to say that David's heart was for the Lord Yahweh only. And that's what he expected. You have sinned more than all who came before you. Ouch. You went and angered me by making other gods formed out of metal. You have completely disregarded me. So now I am ready to bring disaster on the dynasty. And that word disaster is a word play on the Hebrew word for sinned. So disaster and sin kind of word played off of each other. So he goes on to tell him all the males, and there's some vivid things there if you want to read about what's going to happen to them. And the most immediate bad news to the wife is that when she sets foot back home, the boy will die. Now so I like to insert myself into their place. If I'm told that, do I go home? Do I go, okay, I'm just not going home? Or do I... And again, we don't think culturally like them. That's how I would think. Did she just accept the word of the Lord? We're not told much about her background. Right. Well, but that would be my thought. I'm just being honest. I just won't go home. So she goes back, and it happens. She crossed the threshold of the house. The boy died. All Israel buried him and mourned for him in keeping with the Lord's message. And then we get the wrap up. Jeroboam ruled for 22 years. So this whole thing with Jeroboam wasn't... this is the hard part for us. We're going to get all different kind of time frames. Let me just tell him I'll call him back. Hey, Jay, I need to call you back. I'm in class. All right, bye. Texas people, they're an hour behind. So it's been 22 years. This wasn't a short, compressed amount of time that all this developed. And certainly I think part of the message there is Jeroboam had time to change, to do something different, but he did not choose to do that. And so his son Nadab replaces him as king. Now here's the hard part, and you'll be glad when this is over. We just jump between the north and the south, and not necessarily in a straight chronological line. We like things chronological, put it in sequence for me. But we're not necessarily going to exactly do that. Clark. Or he gets fooled, and I think for me part of it is that if we can get the prophet to give something different than the curse we're hoping doesn't come, then got to be bound by that word or something. Yeah. We come up with crazy rationalizations or supposed outcomes. I'm sure you never prayed to God that if he would help you pass this test that you would study the next time, right? Some crazy, we think that's going to be effective.
If they really understood how God works,
Right.
they wouldn't have been evil.
Exactly. Yeah. You can't get to where you need to be because you're pointed the wrong direction, right? You're not even headed the right way, even though they think they can get there. Yeah, I like that. Yes. And that's a very good point, Clark. The whole, when he was in Egypt, the whole pagan culture around is all about appeasement. And sometimes we borrow some of those expectation and ideas. Even today, it's about appeasing, not doing wrong, always making God happy. That's not the point. God wants to be in relationship. He wants us to be holy like he's holy, not tick him off or if he wakes up and is having a bad day or something, we got to watch out.
Go back to Isaac when they tricked him that he was blessing Jacob instead of Esau. I always thought, well, just because, he knew what blessing he wanted to bestow on which child, just because they tricked him,
Right.
which one was in front of him at the time, I never understood how does that make us binding, if he was deceived, how does that transfer to someone who's been dishonest?
In honor-based culture, you gave your word. If you gave your word to Solomon, or whoever, the girl who danced before the Herodias, and you gave your word, you can have whatever you want from me.
Yeah.
She says, I want the head of John the Baptist on a platter. You say, well, I didn't mean that, and you've lost face in front of everybody. It's a different culture.
Yeah, we sometimes have trouble identifying how you get there because we would get there a different way. And so what I hope it does is it causes us to ask those questions. How is it possible that that's what happened? How did it not? Are we on the right track? Are they on the right track? To me, it's the questions that allows us to examine what we're doing that makes it really important. That we just don't accept the cultural values we're given, right? Get ahead any means that you can. If you can get away with it, it's okay, right? That's one of our rules. If nobody catches you, then it's okay. Well, we need to examine some of those, right, in light of what God is calling us to. So now we're jumping down to Judah. There's Rehoboam, and here's Rehoboam. He was 41 years old when he became king, and he ruled for 17 years. He rules less time than Jeroboam. And to Jeff's point a couple weeks ago, he's married to an Ammonite woman. Her name is Naamah, maybe. That might be close. But unfortunately, there's verse 22. Judah did evil in the sight of the Lord. And I think the indictment there is the king led Judah in doing evil in the sight of the Lord. That's the impact of it. This is not saying, oh, the people were bad and Jeroboam wasn't. It's on him. They made him more jealous by their sins than the ancestors had done. So Rehoboam's not heading in a good direction. They even built for themselves high places, sacred pillars, and Asherah poles on every high hill and under every green tree. What's this sounding like? Well, it's sounding like Israel, right? Whatever's going on up there, instead of them coming and returning to Yahweh, it's bleeding down into Judah. And then there's this in verse 25. King Rehoboam's 5th year. Only took 5 years. King Shishak of Egypt attacked Jerusalem. He took away the treasures of the Lord's temple and the royal palace. He took everything, including all the golden shields that Solomon had made. So tell me about a gold shield. What was its purpose?
Solomon probably was trying to demonstrate the majesty of his kingdom, how grand and glorious his kingdom was, and he did succeed in impressively.
Why do you have gold shields? It's not to fight. Because gold is one of the lightest, softest metals. It's not conducive to being a shield, right? It's not gonna last as a shield. These gold shields, what was it? There was 200 big ones and like 400 little ones. I mean, somebody calculated the price, and it was like, this was even a few years ago, just millions and millions and millions of dollars. This was showing off. And it's now all gone. It's all taken to Egypt. And look what King Rehoboam does. He made bronze shields. Actually better shields, but he can't pay for the fancy shields, but he's still trying to keep up appearances. Right? He made bronze shields to replace them and assigned them to the officers of the royal guard who protected the entrance to the royal palace. Instead of trying to keep up appearances, it's obvious, right, what Rehoboam should have been doing. Figuring out how he was going to lead the people in following the Lord. And so we find out then, dropping down to 29, all this stuff's written down, 30. We're told that Rehoboam and Jeroboam were continually at war. So it's these 17 years, they've known nothing but fighting each other. There's nothing like family fighting, right? And this is what this is. His son, Abijah. So if we're not confused enough by the rhyming Jeroboam and Rehoboam, they both had sons named Abijah. Jeroboam's son named Abijah died. But in the south, Abijah becomes king. He ruled for 3 years in Jerusalem. His mother was Maacah, the daughter of Absalom. And just right here at the very front, we find out, don't we? What kind of guy is he going to be? He followed all the sinful practices of his father before him and was not wholeheartedly devoted to the Lord his God as his ancestor David had been. So we still haven't righted the ship. It's still going in the wrong, we're sailing in the wrong direction. The war is going to continue. Abijah passes away, and he is replaced by his son Asa. In the 20th year of Jeroboam's reign, he reigned 22 years, so it's getting near the end of Jeroboam. Asa became king of Judah. He ruled for 41 years in Jerusalem. His grandmother, and actually the Hebrew says mother, but it can't be his mother because we're down a generation. And just so you'll know, oftentimes they didn't distinguish mother and grandmother. They weren't as technical about those terms. Mother just meant who you came from, right? So this is still the same part of the family coming from Absalom. Asa did what the Lord approved of as his ancestor David had done. He removed the disgusting idols. He also removed Maacah, his grandmother, from her position as queen mother because she had made a loathsome Asherah pole. So finally we're seeing a turn here, right? He's even willing to take the old grandmother and remove her from her exalted position. But he doesn't go quite all the way. The high places were not eliminated. Yet Asa, wholeheartedly devoted to the Lord, was devoted to the Lord throughout his lifetime. He brought the holy items that he and his father had made into the Lord's temple, including the silver, the gold, and the other articles. So there's hope here. Judah has turned. Things are going in a better direction. But it's not all there yet. And notice we are going to compare Asa to Baasha. And I say it that way on purpose just because I call him the little sheep king. Baasha. That's probably not how they said it, but I like doing that. And here's one of the times we kind of got our timeline out of order because we left North Israel, who was king, Nadab, and now we're talking about Baasha. We'll get there, but they're just still the writers are still talking about the south, and so they mention. Guess what? The north and south. What are they still doing? Fighting. They're still doing that. In fact, now they're getting really testy because they both had the same idea. The guys in the north, they made a treaty with the people north of them. Why did they do that? You never want a two-front war, right? So let's have peace to the north. We can keep duking it out with our family, right? We don't want anybody else pestering us. But here we have Asa. He gets pretty smart. He sends money up to Ben-Hadad. This is in verse 18. He took the gold and silver that was left, and he tells Ben-Hadad up in Syria, I want to make a treaty with you like the one our fathers made. So I have sent you silver and gold as a present. Break your treaty with King Baasha of Israel, so he will retreat from my land. Is this probably the way Asa should have done this? I don't know. Most people would say it's pretty smart, right? But I would have a different reaction to it if Baasha was following the Lord and listening to him. It seems to me that this was kind of his idea, and it works. Ben-Hadad says, yeah, I'll start attacking, because he sees undefended land, and he doesn't have any trouble breaking his word to Baasha, and he starts picking up territory. And you can read it there, Dan and Abel Beth-Maacah and Naphtali. And it works when Baasha hears about it. He quits building up Ramah, which was that was the checkpoint of going into Judah, and he was stopping everybody from going down there. King Asa ordered all the men of Judah, no exceptions were granted, to carry away the stones of wood that Baasha had used to build Ramah. So not only does he get them diverted, going the other direction, then he goes and steals their stuff so that they can't build it up. Then we find out that, Asa's going to join the people in front of him. And it says, yet when he was very old, he developed a foot disease. Or the technical language, and I would love to know exactly what this is, the technical language from the Hebrew is, he became sick in his feet. So you can see why they called it a foot disease. He passed away, and his son Jehoshaphat replaced him as king. Okay, that's a good place to stop. We'll jump up to to the north next week and get caught up to Basha. Clark.
After Solomon did all of these accumulating wealth and ostentatiously displaying it, late in life he writes Ecclesiastes and says that was all just vanity and
Yeah.
who knows what happens after you leave it to your heirs and so on. Well, even in this chapter we have, well, for one thing, they end up getting it all carried off to Egypt.
Yep.
What doesn't get carried off ends up being used to bribe the Syrians to break their treaty or whatever. So by the time you're all done, it's like everything's back to square zero.
Yeah.
That's all you've really accomplished. You tear down what the king's built and all, everything's back to square zero, except all of the gold is gone to Egypt and Syria.
Well, and I didn't really lay into this a while ago, but if you think about it, it was in the 5th year of of Rehoboam's reign. Not very long. How long had the temple been standing in the glory that it was created? Just a few years. Not very long at all. And it was already taken off. Comes very clear very quickly. So I think there's a lot that we can take from this for ourselves, to be watchful, to ask questions. How should we live? And I appreciate the discussion tonight. It was good. Thanks for giving your input. We'll pick up with the Northern Kingdom next week.